Hello, I'm Larry Johnson, and welcome to this episode of Countercurrents. Today, I'm interviewing and having a conversation with Professor Yakov Rabkin. The good professor, currently a resident of Canada, born in Leningrad in 1946. His father survived the siege of Leningrad, father and mother. And he was, he grew up as a Jew, but not a religious Jew. He later in life converted to Judaism, but he has been the most insightful writer about Zionism and its really pernicious effects on the world. And we're having a conversation about that today. Enjoy our conversation. And please hit the like and subscribe button. Well, you've written an impressive number of books, but you started off. So you were born in Leningrad or St. Petersburg, right?
No, in Leningrad. I was born in Leningrad. It wasn't St. Petersburg then.
Yet, yeah. So, you grew up being educated in the Soviet system.
Yeah.
Which, as I grew up in the United States, we always had this image of this doctrinaire Soviet rigid ideology. And yet, when you look back at the transformation of Russia under Stalin, it went from being an agrarian society with not a lot of well-educated people to a universally well-educated public. How did that happen?
Well, I think from the very beginning, Lenin thought that teaching people to read and write was the highest priority. And people who knew how to write and read went to the countryside, started little groups just to teach people how to write and read. And it worked, because I think in about 10 years, they pretty much destroyed illiteracy. It was but you see, there's one thing two things. First, going back to my lack of notoriety in the West, I'm ready to catch up.
Okay.
I'm still young. I'm just 80, so I can do it. And one thing perhaps you could help me is there's an awful lot of Christians who are disappointed with their belief in Israel, Zionism, and all that.
Yeah.
These, for me, would be a very important audience, because these two short books that I sent you are really simple, easy, and it'll give them ground on which to stand when they oppose. So if you know how to reach out to them, I have no idea how to do it from French-speaking Montreal.
Yeah, well, I'll do what I can to get you in front of people. And I think, getting
do you have an in to Tucker Carlson?
I do, and I'll mention, I'll send your books to him. Of course, he's, as you know, he's in the midst of the battle right now, being accused of being this anti-Semite.
Right. So I think it would be useful for him to perhaps to have me on his show or whatever, but or at least to show the books, and that's important.
Sure. Now, so growing up in Leningrad and going to university, and I forget, did you go to Moscow State University?
Well, no, I first went to Leningrad State University.
Leningrad State.
And then I did graduate studies at the Soviet Academy of Sciences.
Okay. And then you come out of that and you become a professor. And what were you teaching? Largely history?
Yes, I'm trained as a historian of science, and then I still have an interest in historian of science, in history of science, For example, one of my books in 2018, which I didn't mention to you because they are not in this field, is called Demodernization. How people, and you observe it today, how rational argument is disappearing.
Right.
And it's all emotional narrative. Don't mess me up with facts. I'll tell you the truth.
Yeah.
When I wrote it in 2018, it was just beginning. Now it's in your face. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I've been running into that, fighting, the claim that like Iran is the number one sponsor of terrorism in the world, and sorry, the facts just don't back that up. The facts, most of the terrorism has been carried out by radical Sunnis, and even within the Islamic world, they say, those aren't Muslims. They're not. That's a non-Islamic terrorism, which is an interesting take on it. So,
I don't know if I mentioned to you, I was there in 2016.
In Iran.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I visited, and I wrote a little article about it, meeting Jews there, how Jews live there.
Well, that's one of the.
I can send it to you so you can put it in the description.
Sure, that'd be great. Because
right now.
My understanding is the oldest Jewish population outside of Israel is there in Tehran, isn't it?
I think it's older.
Yeah.
I think it's even older. It's about 3,000 years or whatever.
Yeah. And that then that's something that the average Zionist doesn't even imagine, because their notion is that the Iranians are like the SS guards at Auschwitz, lining the Jews up each morning to put them into the gas chamber.
Yeah, well, it's there's so many lies circulating, purposeful lies, not just innocent lies.
Now, so you grew up Jewish in the Soviet Union, the communist Soviet Union. Judaism, though, was you were allowed to practice Jewish religious.
Well, actually, it's not quite that. I knew very little. I knew nothing about Jewish religion or anything.
Okay.
And that's one of the topics we can discuss today. Because in the Soviet Union, just like in Israel, Jewish means nationality, nation. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I didn't learn anything. I didn't hear about Yom Kippur or Passover. I just didn't know. So it was marked in my identity papers that I was Jewish, just like it would be a Russian, Ukrainian, or Uzbek, or whoever. Mm-hmm. And when it's only in Montreal that I started asking the question, what does it mean to be Jewish? And that's how I gradually started studying Judaism with rabbis and other people, and became observant and so on.
Okay. I was fascinated by you think that the whole concept of Zionism, what we call modern Zionism, actually originated in, the 17th century, 18th century? Yeah, explain that.
Are we being recorded or?
Yeah, we're recording.
Oh, really? Because I was eating.
That's fine.
Nice.
That's fine.
No. No, it's not serious. I thought we were just chatting.
Oh, no.
No. Do you mind starting? I'll stop eating now.
Okay.
No. I'm sorry. I just thought we were warming up.
It was you're cold and hungry. It's okay.
No longer cold and no longer hungry. That's so good.
But all right, folks, hold on just a second. We've got something important to share with you. First off, a big thank you for all your incredible support. Our team's been putting in the hours, really working hard to bring you insightful guests, new and improved formats, solid, high-quality analysis every week. Our next goal, hitting that 100,000 subscriber mark and getting that silver button. Let's make it happen together. Every like, comment, share, and subscription truly helps us grow and keep improving. All right then, let's get back to the video. Yeah, so let's, the origins.
Let's start all over, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the origins of Zionism. Where did that, the traditional narrative is late 19th century, Theodor Herzl, who's not an observant Jew, but began pushing the concept of developing a homeland for the Jews.
Right. Well,
maybe before we say that, what is a Jew?
Well, Jew has been a person, a community, Jewish community, that, according to the Jewish tradition, emerged as a group from Egypt when they were in slavery. And that's what Passover commemorates, the freedom, liberation from Egypt. So this group left Egypt, was taken out of Egypt, according to tradition, by God. And shortly thereafter, the purpose of their liberation was actualized on Mount Sinai, where they received the Torah, the teaching, and observance of that teaching, commitment to that teaching, is what created Jews. In other words, they emerged as a group in Egypt, and they formed as a community at Mount Sinai, which is, again, not in the land of Israel.
Right. So
that's what and that's how the definition of the Jew has continued for thousands of years. Say one Jewish rabbi in, I think, 9th century said, "We are Jews only thanks to the Torah and commandments which it contains." So in other words, we are not different from others, but the only difference is that we are committed to observing the commandments and studying Torah and so on.
Well, the reason I raise that is I know that right now in the right of return to Israel, if you're Jewish, you have the right to return, unless you're Jewish, but you convert to Christianity, and you can't return to Israel.
or some other religion, yeah.
Yeah. So that implies that this Judaism is religious based, except many of the most prominent advocates of Judaism, like Bibi Netanyahu, or Zionism, like Bibi Netanyahu, are not religious Jews.
Well, now I'm answering your second question, what is Zionism and when it emerged? Well, Zionism is a political movement. It has nothing to do with religion. And in fact, as you mentioned, Herzl and his friends were non-observant and essentially indifferent. Moreover, they were not learned. They didn't know very much about Judaism. They were just Central European, German-speaking intellectuals of Jewish descent. That's how I would put it.
Mm-hmm.
And they suffered from a certain malaise that they were not accepted in every group in Vienna or in Berlin because there was anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is a movement that originated slightly earlier than Zionism. Is that Jewish Zionism, I mean. And it aims at excluding Jews from society. Jews, as anti-Semites, believe that Jews are essentially evil and they would subvert the nation in which they live, and therefore they have to be somehow isolated, expelled, or in the worst of cases, like in the middle of the 20th century, exterminated. So that's what anti-Semitism is. It's a racial movement. Again, it's not religious. It's a racial thing.
Right.
Now, Zionism, the idea, now the word Zionism, of course, is the second part of the 19th century, but the idea of ingathering Jews by political or military means in the Holy Land is an idea that emerged in the 17th century among certain Protestant groups. And why Protestant? Because Protestantism, starting with Luther, wanted to bring the Bible to everyone. So everyone could open the Bible and read it. And that's why he translated it in the vernacular into German at that time. And the literal reading of the Bible is what distinguishes Protestants, among other things, from Catholics who follow the church interpretation of the Holy Writ. I mentioned that because in the 17th, 18th century, and particularly in the 19th, the idea of ingathering the Hebrews in the Holy Land, that's how it was phrased, became popular. It became popular largely in English-speaking areas in Britain and what would become the United States. And these people wanted to not only to bring them in the Holy Land, but use them as a necessary step towards speeding the second coming of Christ. So that is a whole theological program. And, for example, Lord Shaftesbury, who was a politician and a very committed, I would say, Christian Zionist, but the word Zionist didn't exist then, of course. He wrote a letter to the Christian monarchs of Europe. We have to all help Jews to settle in the Holy Land. And he also, at the same time, was chairing an organization devoted to conversion of Jews to Christianity. So the two things went together. It's part of the same scenario. And in the middle of the 19th century, Britain had obvious geopolitical interests in the area of the Holy Land. Suez Canal, way to India, and so on. So it became a very, very powerful movement in Britain. That's why Zionism really emerged in the 17th century, and the religious basis of Zionism is Protestantism.
Yeah, in fact, I was raised in let's call it an offshoot of the Mormon Church, but with the roots of Mormonism are very deep in the whole eschatological vision of the building of Zion and the return of Jesus. And that was very active in like the 1830s, 1840s in the United States at that time. So the Christian Zionism seems like a complete contradiction in terms, because it involves the return of Jews to Jerusalem, and with it the notion of the construction of the third temple, whereas the entire essence of Christianity was Jesus is the living temple. Not you don't have to have a physical building. And yet, both Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they're all big on buildings. Okay, they're told God said don't have any idols. Well, we don't call them idols, but what do you call the Vatican? Or Dome of the Rock. I'm not trying to insult my Muslim friends, but I always viewed with and this is how my mind works. You get the commandments, 10 commandments. Thou shalt not make any graven image, and then you get the entire book of Deuteronomy, which is chapter and verse on how to build different images. Great, this gold and adorn this and this wood, and it's like, folks, a bit of a contradiction here, huh?
Life is full of contradiction, isn't it?
So we're in. I would say we're in sort of a unique historical period now with the proliferation of the most extreme form of Christian Zionism, and these attacks like that have been unleashed lately on Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens. What do you make of all this? Where do you think it's headed?
Well, let me step back for a second and mention that Christian Zionists today are many times more numerous than the number of Jews, including babies and old people like myself. And that's very important to keep in mind. Pastor Hagee, late Pastor Hagee, said that there were 50 million Christian Zionists in the United States. And there are only 15 million. Oh, so I said 50 million, he said. No, not 50,000, 50 million.
Yeah, 50 million.
And there are only 15 million Jews around the world. So just in the United States, there are, 3 times more Christian Zionists than Jews altogether. And if you include Christian Zionists in Brazil, a very important community, in many Latin American countries, in South Korea, and in Africa, so you have a huge number of people who believe in the ingathering of Jews in order to speed the second coming of Christ. And then Jews will be given a choice, either recognize Jesus as Messiah or perish.
Yeah, that's just...
And Gershon Gorenberg, who wrote a book about Christian Zionism, he put it very succinctly in one interview. He said, it's a play in 5 acts, and we disappear in the 4th one. And I think it's very important to understand that Jews in that scenario are an instrument. They're an instrument of a larger plan. And, that's a very important element today of political support for Israel, the Christian Zionists. When Netanyahu was Israeli representative at the UN in New York, he spent enormous amount of time in the south of the United States where there are barely any Jews, but he cultivated links with evangelical communities, and he did a very good job. Very good job. Now, you asked me, today there is a very important change happening. Well, Jews, from the beginning, many were opposed to this idea, to the idea of Zionism. So when Herzl and his friends organized the first Zionist Congress, as you know, it was in 1897 in Basel. Originally, they wanted to have it in a big Jewish community like Munich, but German Jews petitioned the German government to forbid the holding of the Zionist Congress. Why? Because they recognized some familiar motives in the Zionist message. You don't belong in your country. You're an alien element. You have to go to Palestine. That's pretty much what the anti-Semites were saying.
Right.
So there was, and this coincidence is not a matter of sort of chance. Herzl understood. He was a very, very charismatic, but also very intelligent person. He died, he was 44 years old, and he accomplished a lot during his life. He wrote in his diary, anti-Semites will be our best friends and allies. And he was totally right. So now, of course, both Jews and Christian Zionists are divided. Many Jews have been opposed to Zionism since the very beginning. And perhaps the most fervent opponents of Zionism are very Orthodox Jews that you would find in Brooklyn, in Antwerp, and of course in Jerusalem.
Right.
And many of them don't recognize the state. And if they do recognize the state, they don't want to be involved in its activities. And that's why thousands of these very Orthodox Jews refuse to go to the army. And they say, we'd rather go to prison than to the army. when I was presenting one of my books, someone asked me, well, if they're so much opposed to Israel, why do they live there? It's a good question. So I asked this question to one of the rabbis in Jerusalem when I was there. And he answered, well, look, we were here under the Ottoman Empire. We were here under the British Empire. And we'll be here after the Zionists. For them, the land of Israel has nothing to do with the Zionist state. Mm-hmm. And they lived as a minority for hundreds of years there, and they're ready to live like a minority later after the Zionists. So the Jews have been divided. And actually, today, when you could see that, I think about 1/3 of the votes for Mamdani, the new mayor of New York, were cast by Jews. Hmm. Now, Mamdani is an overt critic of Israel and Zionism. Mm-hmm. And some people say, and in spite of that, Jews voted for him. I would say because of that, they voted for him, not in spite of that. So Jews have been divided about Zionism for many, many decades. Christian Zionists weren't. In fact, they became Christian Zionists because they believed in this whole script. Now, with the genocide in Gaza and other things, there is a division among them. Some people say, well, what we are observing, we as Christians cannot condone it.
Right.
That's, I think, what Tucker Carlson and many others are saying. And potentially, it is a very important split because it may have political consequences. And perhaps, and I'm not sure, but it's a hypothesis, perhaps the current war against Iran was precipitated by the sense that Netanyahu had that this Christian support is melting. Mm-hmm. And time is of the essence. And for all kinds of reasons. Well, he didn't tell me that, and I'm not inside his head. But it makes sense that if you have to rely on support of the United States, and in the United States, and particularly in the current administration, there are quite a few Christian Zionists, and this Christian Zionist message even is spread among the troops, the U.S. Air Force, definitely.
Right.
So this is a good moment to start a war, particularly when this support is melting. So you asked me which way it is going. I think this support will continue melting because unlike previous decades, today's Israeli actions are very open. It's very clear. They don't dress it up in terms of international law or anything. They do because they can. And I think for many Christians, and I think for many religious people, be they Christians or otherwise, it's inhumane what's happening. Mm-hmm. And you cannot support something which has been consistently inhumane. You know, the expulsions of the Palestinians began in 1947.
Right.
And we are observing the continuation of Nakba. It's not that it stopped. It never stopped. And what happened to Gaza is exactly part of the same process to get rid of them. Incidentally, you recognize the same motive. They're alien, we have to get rid of them. It's exactly the same Central European idea that states have to be pure, in quotation marks, that you only have to have one ethnic group, and otherwise it's not a viable state. And therefore you have to purify, in quotation mark, your country. That's what Hitler tried to do. That's what quite a few other people who support ethnic nationalism. So ethnic nationalism is an extremely explosive thing because it divides the population into two groups, we and them. And them obviously don't belong. You may tolerate them, you don't have to kill them right away, but They're not part of your ethnic majority. And this is the idea that Israel is founded on.
Well, yeah, in fact, you can make the case, and maybe you have looked at, I haven't looked into this, it's just thinking off the top of my head. How many civilizations in history, recorded history, have been what we'd call ethno-nationalists, ethno-supremacists?
Well, nationalism is a 19th century phenomenon.
Right. So we got the national.
You can go very far. You can go very far. And you can't. And ethnic nationalism is something which was particular, and is particularly virulent in Central and Eastern Europe. Because after the Versailles Treaty, when the Austro-Hungarian Empire was fragmented, and so the Russian Empire and others. After the Versailles Treaty, they created ethnic states. The Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. These, with the exception of Czechoslovakia, which never developed its native fascism, all the others did.
Well,
because ethnic nationalism naturally evolves into some kind of fascist ideas. Why Czechoslovakia didn't? Because it was a binational state by definition.
Yeah.
So you couldn't have it. So the idea of having ethnic nationalist state is a Central European idea that was transferred to Palestine, where it fit just as badly as it did in Central Europe. Because both in Central Europe and in former Ottoman Empire in Palestine, the population was always mixed, very diverse, different confessions, different ethnic groups, and that was a normal way of living. Under the Ottoman Empire, different communities had certain autonomy, certain legal autonomy, so they could run their own affairs, but essentially they lived more or less in harmony. It's the idea of ethnic nationalism where the state has to be, in that particular case, Jewish, even though no one knows what the Jewish state is.
Yeah.
I remember having seminars in Israel when I was there on sabbatical. People were arguing, what's a Jewish state? A state in which Jews are the majority, states that observes Jewish law. It's like, what is a Jewish table? A table made by a Jew, bought by a Jew, that has kosher food on it? We don't know.
Yeah.
It's the same thing about Jewish state. Jewish state is extremely vague term. Unfortunately, in the name of that vague term, much blood has been spilled.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about the whole ethno identity back in, let's see, it was about 2000, 2001. So I was teaching in the State Department's anti-terrorism assistance training program, would bring over people from other countries, and we would have a seminar on crisis management. And it was a week-long program. And so we had Czechoslovakia, but they had just in the process of becoming the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic. So at the end, when we presented a plaque, we handed the plaque, and there was a Czech on this side and a Slovak on this side, and they each grabbed for it. It was a tug of war back and forth. We realized we should have had two plaques,
Well, actually, it's an excellent embodiment of what ethnic nationalism is.
Yeah.
Because when it was Czechoslovakia, they would share that plaque with no problem.
Right.
As soon as you have two separate entities, that's what you get. Actually, it's extremely interesting example that you brought in.
I witnessed it firsthand. Let me ask you about Iran and the Jewish community there. How does that work? Because, again, the image that's presented of Iran is an intolerant, ethno-fascist state. And
Well,
I mean, that's how the West perceives it, at least in the United States. Yeah, but that, it's not true. I know it's not true. But you've been there, you've seen it firsthand, and you've talked to the Jewish community, which, as we were talking about earlier, was probably the oldest in the world. Going back to when they were carried away into captivity, and that group decided, hey, it's not bad here, we'll stay here.
True. Well, I'm not an expert in Iran. What I can share is my impressions,
Sure.
What I saw. I spent a month there exactly 10 years ago. It was the Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which is right now around this time. And I went there, and being an observant Jew, I naturally went to the synagogue. I looked for kosher restaurants. You need the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And what struck me, first thing that struck me, of course, was that there were no guards at the entrance to the synagogue. Just you walk in like you walk in anywhere. In most places in Europe, the best way to recognize a synagogue, a police car sitting in front.
Yeah.
So later I met people, talked with them. I traveled into Iran, Isfahan, Shiraz, Qom. I gave lectures there. So I found the Jews were very committed to Judaism. At the same time, they were pretty modern people. They also were part of the Iranian nation and are part of the Iranian nation. Since it was the New Year, and I remember Friday night, I was walking with some Jews to the synagogue, and they would meet and say to each other, Shabbat Shalom, Nowruz Mubarak, in one sentence. And for me, it embodied the merge of the two. Now, we shouldn't be surprised. And the reason we are surprised is that we have in mind European Jewish history, where it didn't happen, where Jews were discriminated and murdered and expelled for hundreds of years. And in Iran, of course, there were also cases of violence. It shouldn't be forgotten, but by and large, it was a much more harmonious coexistence. And that's why they're the Iranians. So another thing which I found very interesting, which you rarely find, is that they didn't speak Hebrew, modern Hebrew. They knew biblical Hebrew, but it was not a spoken language. Just like before the invention of the modern Hebrew in the second part of the 19th century, learned Jews knew how to read Hebrew, write it, but it wasn't a spoken language. So in Iran, among them, it's not a spoken language, even among those who are very learned in Jewish texts. That was a very interesting thing. And in Shiraz, I met students who were studying to become rabbis and ritual slaughterers of meat, and they knew Jewish law very well. But we had to communicate in broken English rather than in Hebrew, even though they read Hebrew perfectly well. So that's very interesting. Another thing that I noticed is that they were not afraid. And moreover, the Jewish community today is much more observant than it was under the Shah. Why? Because the Islamic government obliges all school students to study religion. Well, if you're Jewish, you are obliged to study Jewish religion.
Oh, really?
Yeah. As a result, they're much more knowledgeable in Judaism than their counterparts elsewhere, and particularly than their parents, who grew up under the Shah, which wasn't. So that's an interesting side benefit, so to speak. So My impression is that they live a very traditional life, all the while being perfectly modern. Among people I met, there was a graduate student in American literature, but very observant, because some very observant people, for example, wouldn't drink milk which is not certified kosher. I do, but so when I offered him some yogurt there, he says, no, I won't have it. But at the same time, he was dressed in jeans and perfectly modern guy.
Yeah.
So this, and this is typical of non-European Jews, where it didn't have a split between religious and non-religious. There was much more of a unity of communities, and whereas in Europe you had tremendous ideological divisions and religious divisions between those who upheld Judaism and those who abandoned Judaism and became even anti-religious, and many of them became Zionists. So that's another part which we have to remember. And here I'll quote another colleague of mine, Israeli colleague of mine as well, who said, the claim of the early Zionists on this land is very simple. God doesn't exist, and he promised us this land.
Yeah, I know. That's that encapsulates it. Yeah, that's been the thing I've always found so frustrating, is that many of the most outspoken Zionists have zero belief in the story of the Torah and the role of God is as the creator. No, there is no God, but He gave us this land, and it's just the complete intellectual contradiction in all of that.
Well, actually, there was a poll taken in the United States among Jews and Christians, different kinds of Christians. And the question is, do you believe that the state of Israel is God-given? You wouldn't be surprised that Christians agreed with that statement a lot more than Jews.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I grew up in a religious society where that was seen as this is the sign of the end of times. Jesus is coming. This is one sign, and now the next step is there's got to be this battle of Armageddon. And it's like,
well,
we're out here starting a war.
We are getting there. We are getting there, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, there's almost willfully chose to do this. Well, we know actually Trump chose to do this. Chose to light the match.
Yeah. There's one word that was used a lot 4 years ago, and is not used now for some reason. Unprovoked.
Yeah. Well, I've got the book by Scott Horton behind me called Provoked, which is about the war in Ukraine.
But this is, if there is an unprovoked war, this one is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The sort of the shock among the young Iranians. I had a conversation with he's 40, so relative to me, he's young. So, I'm 10 years your junior, but Well,
you look good.
Yeah, we're all well aged. Well attributed to the precise consumption of alcohol for preservation. but for him, when I started thinking back, the first shock that Iran had was in September of 1980 with the attack by Saddam Hussein, one at the encouragement of the United States, and then the United States basically backed Saddam throughout that entire war, whether it was providing, giving the precursors for chemical weapons, which we did, providing him with intelligence, his army with intelligence. I was friends with the man who hand-carried the intelligence to him. He later went on to be the chief of the Middle East division of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And he also set up the Arabic program at West Point. So, his name was Walter Patrick Lang, Pat Lang. So we did a lot to Iran at that point. And then for that 9-year war, the United States was fully in on. That shaped that generation. But then when you think back, if you're born in 1980, or you'd have to be basically 10 years old in 1980 to really have a memory of that war in terms of having an impact on you as a person. Well, add 10 to 46, 56 years old. So everybody who's like 50 years of age and younger, they didn't have that moment like we had in the United States with 9/11. Those attacks, for the people who were there and remember it created a unity. Well, that's what now Israel and the United States have done for Iran. They have created a unifying moment that this young guy was like, he was maybe wavering as far as his support of the Islamic Republic 2 months ago, but not now. It's full on.
Well, it's has to do with I would call it patriotism, or you call it a sense of timing.
Mm-hmm.
My father, when I was born right after the Second World War, and when I grew up, I realized my father was very critical of the Soviet system. He was making fun of certain aspects of Soviet system, and then after a while, I asked him, and did he speak like that during the war? Because he spent the war in the siege of Leningrad and besieged by Nazi troops, Nazi Finnish and Spanish troops, incidentally, not only German. We always forget that there were 15 armies that attacked the Soviet Union, not just one. But I asked him, did you express this kind of ideas to your friends? And he says, no. That wasn't the time to criticize. That was the time to be united.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very important lesson. You can criticize and try to reform and so on, but you have to know the timing when there is a danger to the state itself. That's not the right time to do it. And I think your interlocutor must have felt the same way.
Right. Yeah, it is, we're sort of caught right now in this dilemma of the attempt to promote patriotism in the United States against by further demonization of Iran. And yet, I keep trying to point out to people that the Iranians during that Iraq-Iran war, when chemical weapons were being used on them, the Islamic Republic did not retaliate in kind. In other words, they did not develop chemical weapons, and they didn't use them. And the reason they didn't use them is because they actually believed that would violate the tenets of Islam.
Haram.
Yeah, it's haram. Exactly. Then the same reason why under Ali Khamenei, they did not develop a nuclear weapon. Again, haram. And we just seen another demonstration of this, which for me, I think is pretty profound. When the United States hit that desalinization plant in Iran the other day, up to this point, Iran has had the principle of, you hit our oil depots, we're going to hit your oil depots. A tit for tat, eye for the eye. But in this case, they didn't respond. They didn't retaliate. And I asked this one young Iranian, and he was not a deeply religious guy, but he said, look, that the foundation of Shia Islam was the Imam Hussein. who was deprived of water for 3 days before he was killed in this war against this much larger force. Yeah, but it was his martyrdom that became, one of the inspirations. And he says, there's no way we could attack the desalinization plants in these other Gulf Arab countries, these other Muslim countries, because we would bring thirst and, possibly cause people to die. He said we couldn't do that. And I thought, there's an interesting idea, having moral principles that prevents you from taking life.
That's what you said is extremely important, because what we've heard about the war against Gaza and the war against Iran, I haven't heard any moral principles invoked.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, it's important to do it because they'll have a nuclear weapon and so on, in spite of your former colleagues' conclusions that there isn't any nuclear weapon.
Right.
But there were never a concern. Particularly, I haven't heard concern from Israel, from those who make decisions about starving people, about destroying their homes, about just killing them. No, there were issues of convenience, if it's reasonable to do it, if it's appropriate, if it'll reach the results we want to reach. But I haven't heard too much of moral soul-searching.
Right.
During all those, since October 23, it's almost 3 years. And this, for me, shows that not only rationality is being cast aside, but perhaps many moral principles as well.
Yeah, and that is the sad thing about what's happened to the United States, because we used to think of ourselves as sort of a special place, and that and Ronald Reagan talked about it in terms of Isaiah. We are the city on the hill, this light to the world. Great, but when you're starting wars all the time and killing people from other countries, especially civilians, I looked into, just as an example, and you may, as a historian, you may or may not know this, but during the last year of the war in the Pacific, the way the narrative is told in the United States, it was because of our bombing campaign of Japan and the dropping of the atomic bombs that we won the war. That stopped the war. But the average American doesn't realize that, just starting with the firebombing of Tokyo, which killed over 100,000, or maybe it was 200, it killed an enormous number of Japanese, that from March through the end of July, there was this constant bombardment that killed upwards of around 500,000 Japanese civilians. And to put that number into context, the United States during World War II, our total loss of soldiers in both the Pacific and European theater was 470,000 roughly. So we killed more Japanese civilians in a 5-month period than all of our soldiers had died at the hands of Japanese and German armies in 4 years.
Yeah.
And then we dropped the atomic bombs. But the reality was, the reason Japan surrendered was the entry of the Soviet army into the war on August 8th, and then the defeat of the Japanese army in Manchuria, which finally convinced them, all right, we need to surrender now. But my point is, we just routinely, we got used to we killed civilians, thinking that would bring peace. It didn't. It was just an excuse.
Yeah, and also carpet bombing of Dresden and Königsberg.
Yeah.
So you had the same phenomenon there, and there was no military reason for that.
Yeah.
But so the tradition of causing suffering to civilians in order to reach victory is not something new. It's part of the arsenal.
Yeah. I'll put you in the position of being a prophet. Where are we headed now with this? What do you project is the outcome of this current war with Iran?
Well, look, I'm definitely not a military expert. So it's what I hear from people like you, incidentally, is that the United States most probably will declare a victory at one point and withdraw. And the only reason they haven't done it is perhaps Israel prevents them from doing it.
Yeah.
And as far as Israel is concerned, I think it will solidify its dominance in the region, even if it eventually stops bombarding Iran. And it will. I mean, they don't have infinite amount of munitions to do it.
Right.
But they will definitely weaken Iran, because this current war certainly destroys a lot of infrastructure and kills quite a few people. So Israel will remain a much larger country. Pretty much what Ambassador Huckabee foresaw in his interview a few weeks ago. He said, well, it's from Nile to Euphrates. It's fine with me if they take all this territory. And so far, they've taken territory in Lebanon and Syria. They have essentially neutered states, Egypt and Jordan. And now they try to weaken Iran so that, and the weakness, you see, that's very important. Iran is the last major state that supports the Palestinian cause.
Mm-hmm.
All of the others pay lip service and happily trade with Israel and buy arms from Israel. Iran is the last state that actually supported Palestinian resistance. And this, in my opinion, is the main reason why Israel attacked it. It wants to destroy all support for the Palestinians from outside.
Yeah.
I wrote an article I can send you. I may have sent it to you, that people ask a wrong question about the war.
Oh, yes.
So they ask, well, will it be another debacle for the United States? But for Netanyahu, that's not the issue. The issue is, will they weaken and eliminate Iran as a supporter of Palestinian cause? That's what is important.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't succeed, and if Iranians have more munitions than Israelis always have their nuclear arsenal, and God forbid they may use it.
Yeah, of course, I think one other thing, though, disadvantages Israel. Well, two things. One, they've demonstrated the incapacity to defeat Hamas. I mean, when you've got...
or Hezbollah.
Or Hezbollah, right. But Hamas in particular were, I liken it to the Warsaw Ghetto. Here it's essentially it's like a ghetto. Now, in the Warsaw Uprising by the Jews, the Leon Uris's Mila 18 was the book recounting that. They fought for about a month, and then were overwhelmed by the Wehrmacht. Well, here Hamas, who's been up against the equivalent of a Wehrmacht, with the same, with not, basically rifles, sidearms, a few RPGs, they fought the Israelis to a standstill after more than 2 years. And now Israel has embarked on this campaign in southern Lebanon, where it's, as you recall in 20 years ago, 2006, they got beat up pretty badly and had to call a halt to it after 33 days. They couldn't sustain the losses. And what I see Iran doing right now is it has depleted Israel's air defense system, and now will continue to hit the day after day after day with a barrage of missiles that are going to be targeted at key infrastructure, key industries. I think it's going to dramatically weaken Israel. And then it brings back, at which point will they be tempted to use a nuke? And the one possible counter to that is that I believe Iran very well, now that the Ali Khamenei's dead, they'll produce a nuke as an insurance against getting hit.
Well, I definitely believe that if Israel faces what they consider existential threat, and they may use nuclear weapons, and I don't think there will be too many moral scruples, because I haven't seen them so far. I don't know why they would appear all of a sudden, because it's a very cynical political culture, and I trust that they would use it. There are two questions that are important to ask. What constitutes an existential threat for Israel?
Mm-hmm.
And what I write in that article that you may have read is that it's equality with the Palestinians that constitutes an existential threat. It's not physical destruction.
Yeah.
It is a transformation of a Zionist regime into an apartheid regime, into a state of civil equality, more or less like in South Africa. Many countries undergo drastic political change without many people being killed. And one of them is my native country, which is Soviet Union, which is no longer around. There are 15 different states. With the exception of Ukraine, and again, you and I would agree that it was not homegrown hostility; it's something else.
Right.
The change occurred, and it's a very different political regime now than it was before the end of the Soviet Union. And the same thing can happen in Israel-Palestine, where you have pretty much equal numbers of Palestinians and Jews, except that Jews have political rights and most Palestinians don't. So it's not such a difficult thing. But for Israel, for those, I think for many Israelis, for the large majority of Israelis, equality with Palestinian equals existential threat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we should understand. So we're not talking about physical destruction, we're talking about political transformation that they resist. And that's why, unfortunately, they may even use nuclear weapon in such a case.
I hope you're wrong, but I fear you might be right. Well, we'll see as this unfolds.
I share your hope.
Yeah. Well, listen, I thank you for this. We're well over an hour of your time in this conversation. I will put all the links in the description for your books, encouraging people to get out and read them. I think you really have an important voice in this, and I'll do what I can to get you introduced to the likes of Tucker Carlson and Judge Napolitano. And
it's important even to reach people who honestly have moral concerns about this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there are millions of Christians who would like to understand what Zionism is, how Israel came about, and why the state of Israel is very different from the celestial Israel that they read about in the Bible. So all these things. And of course, I'm very glad that we had this conversation, and I hope it'll open a few eyes.
Well, my takeaway is there is no God, and he gave us this land.
Absolutely.
Okay, Yakov, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Larry.
Okay. That was Professor Rabkin. We're going to put into the description the links to his books, his articles, his website. I encourage you to buy his latest. It's available on Amazon. But I think you glean some very important insights about this, let's call it the pernicious effect of Judaism, particularly of Christian Zionism. Didn't mean Judaism, Christian Zionism. And how it's taking us to a possible conflict that the world just does not need, and that will cause needless suffering and death. Please hit the like and subscribe button. We are building our audience slowly, and I appreciate your support. I'm Larry Johnson, and this is Countercurrents.